They left her in the dust like she didn't belong to this world, and by sunrise, men who owned the horizon would come asking for her name. The wind carried that dry desert smell, sun-baked dirt and old leather, as Caleb Whitaker pulled his horse to a slow stop just outside the edge of the road, where the trail bent past a broken fence line no one bothered to fix anymore. He saw her there, half shadowed by a crooked post, lying too still for someone who meant to rest, her dress torn by time and travel, her hair streaked with dust that clung like memory. 2 sets of boot tracks led away from her, deep and careless, the kind left by men who didn't look back. Caleb didn't move at first. Out here, a man learned that stepping into someone else's trouble had a way of following him home. His horse shifted beneath him, snorting low, sensing something not right in the quiet. A crow called from somewhere above, sharp and alone. Caleb exhaled slowly, eyes fixed on the woman. She wasn't reaching for help. Wasn't calling out. Just breathing, barely. That was enough. He swung down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground with a dull thud, dust rising around him like it didn't want him there either. Up close, he saw the small details most folks missed, the way her fingers curled tight around something pressed to her chest, the faint mark along her wrist that looked less like injury and more like something placed there with meaning, the way her eyes flickered open just long enough to find him, not with relief, but with caution. "Easy," Caleb said, voice low, steady, like he was speaking to a frightened colt. She didn't answer. Just watched him, breathing shallow, measuring him in a way that made him feel like the stranger. He hesitated, just a second, then reached down, slow enough to give her time to pull away. She didn't. Her weight was lighter than he expected, but not fragile. There was strength there, hidden under exhaustion, like something waiting. He carried her to the horse, the leather saddle warm from the sun, and settled her across it with care, one hand steadying her as she swayed. The object in her grip caught the light for a moment, a small piece of turquoise wrapped in worn silver, simple, but not something a person lost. By accident. Caleb noticed. He didn't ask. The road back to his place stretched quiet and long, nearly 2 miles of open land where the wind spoke louder than people ever did. He rode slow. Didn't look back. But he felt it. That shift in the air. Like the desert had taken note of what he'd done. By the time his cabin came into view, low and weathered against the horizon, the sun had dipped just enough to throw long shadows across the ground. He lifted her down again, boots crunching softly against gravel, and carried her inside where the air smelled faintly of wood and old coffee. He set her on the bed, stepping back just enough to give her space. For a moment, nothing moved. Then her hand tightened around that small piece of turquoise, and her voice came out, barely more than breath. "Don't let them find me." Caleb stood there, still as the walls around him, eyes narrowing just slightly, not from fear, but from understanding. Out here, people didn't run unless something worse was behind them. And whatever it was, it hadn't given up yet. Caleb did not ask her name again that night. Some things, he had learned, came on their own or not at all. The cabin settled into silence, wood creaking softly as the desert air cooled, the kind of quiet that made every small sound feel heavier than it should. He lit a lantern and set it near the far wall, not too close, just enough to keep the shadows from closing in. She had not moved much since he laid her down, but her eyes stayed open, tracking every shift of light, every step he took across the room. Not fear exactly. Awareness. Like someone who had spent too long needing to know where danger stood. Caleb poured water into a tin cup and placed it on the small table beside her. He stepped back again, giving her space before she even had to ask for it. She did not reach for the cup right away. Instead, her fingers tightened around that piece of turquoise, the silver catching the lantern light in a way that made it feel older than the room itself. "You are not from here," she said finally, her voice still quiet but steadier than before. Caleb leaned against the wall, arms loose at his sides. "Been here long enough," he answered. She studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing the truth of that against something only she understood. Then, slowly, she pushed herself up, just enough to sit. The movement cost her. He could see it in the way her breath caught, but she did not ask for help. Did not look at him when she reached for the cup. She drank in small, careful sips, like someone who knew better than to take too much too fast. Outside, the wind shifted. Caleb heard it before he saw anything. A change in direction, subtle, but enough to carry sound differently. He turned his head slightly toward the door, listening. Nothing yet. But something had moved out there. He felt it the way a man feels weather before it breaks. "You said they would come," he said, not looking back at her. She did not answer right away. When she did, her voice had changed. Not softer. Just clearer. "They always do." Caleb nodded once, more to himself than to her. He crossed the room, checking the latch on the door, the window by the far wall, small habits built from years of living where help did not arrive on time. When he turned back, she was watching him differently now. Not measuring. Recognizing. "You do not carry a gun like the others," she said. Caleb glanced down at his belt, then back at her. "Still carries," he replied. "Just not for show." Something in that answer settled between them. Not trust. But not distance either. The lantern flickered as a draft slipped through the cracks in the wood. Her gaze dropped to the object in her hand, thumb brushing over the turquoise stone like it held more than shape and color. "That means something," Caleb said, nodding toward it. This time, she did not hide it. She lifted it slightly, letting the light catch the worn edges. "It is not mine," she said. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "You hold it like it is." She looked up at him then, and for the first time, there was something else in her eyes. Not fear. Not caution. Something heavier. "It was given," she said. "To someone who saved a life." The words hung there, quiet but sharp. Caleb did not respond. Outside, a distant sound finally reached him. Faint. Rhythmic. Not wind. Not animal. Hoofbeats. Far. Off, but coming. He straightened slowly, his posture shifting just enough to tell the difference between a man resting and a man preparing. The woman heard it too. He saw it in the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her grip tightened around the turquoise until her knuckles paled under the dust. "Not them," she said quickly, almost under her breath. Caleb looked at her. "Then who?" She held his gaze for a long second, and whatever answer she carried, she chose not to give it. Instead, she said something else. "If they ask for me, you must not tell them I am here." Caleb walked to the door, resting his hand against the rough wood, feeling the faint vibration of the ground through it as the hoofbeats grew closer. He did not open it. "Not yet." "You are in my house," he said, voice even, steady as stone. "Out here, that still means something." Behind him, she closed her eyes, just for a second, as if those words carried a weight she had not expected. The sound outside grew louder. One rider. Maybe two. Not a group. Not yet. But enough to change the night. Caleb exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a man takes before a moment he knows will matter. And somewhere beyond the reach of that small cabin, the desert was already beginning to shift. The sound of hoofbeats slowed before it reached the door, not in fear, but in certainty, like the rider already knew exactly where he was going. Caleb stood still, one hand resting against the wood, feeling each faint vibration fade into silence just outside his cabin. No knock came at first. No voice. Just the quiet presence of someone waiting on the other side. Behind him, the woman had not moved, but he could feel the tension in the room shift, tighter now, sharper. Then came the sound. A single boot hitting the ground. Measured. Unhurried. Caleb opened the door halfway, just enough to see without offering more than necessary. A man sat on a dark horse, reins loose in one hand, posture straight but not rigid. He wore no badge, no uniform, nothing that claimed authority, yet something about him carried it anyway. His eyes moved once, quick and deliberate, taking in the cabin, the fence line, the horse tied nearby. Then they settled on Caleb. "Evening," the rider said. Voice calm, almost polite. Caleb gave a small nod. Evening. The man studied him for a second longer, then tilted his head slightly, like he was confirming something already decided. You pass anyone on the road today? Caleb did not answer right away. He leaned one shoulder against the doorframe, casual enough to look unbothered, firm enough to close the space behind him. Road sees a lot of folks, he said. Most of them keep moving. The rider's gaze did not shift. Some do, he replied. Some do not. The air between them held steady, like a line pulled tight but not yet breaking. Caleb noticed the details now. The man's boots were clean despite the dust, his saddle well kept but worn in the right places, his hands resting easy, not near a weapon, but not far from it either. This was not a man guessing. This was a man confirming. Looking for someone? Caleb asked. The rider gave a faint smile, though it did not reach his eyes. We all are, one way or another. He paused, just long enough to let the words settle. Woman traveling alone. Dark hair. Might be hurt. Caleb's expression did not change. Ain't seen her. It was not the way he said it. It was how little he added. The rider watched him for a moment longer, then glanced past his shoulder, just briefly, as if measuring the silence inside the cabin. Not pushing. Not forcing. Just observing. If you do, the man said, turning the reins slightly, you might want to remember this land does not belong to you alone. Caleb nodded once. Never thought it did. The rider held his gaze, something unreadable passing through his eyes, then gave a small, almost respectful dip of his chin. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode off, the sound of hooves fading back into the open desert, slower this time, less certain. Caleb did not close the door right away. He stood there, watching the dust settle long after the rider disappeared beyond the bend. Only then did he shut it, the wood-meeting frame with a quiet finality. When he turned back, she was already standing. Not where he left her. Closer now. Steadier. The weakness from before had shifted, like it had never fully belonged to her in the first place. Her eyes met his, and this time there was no hesitation in them. He is not one of them, she said. Caleb frowned slightly. Then who is he? She looked toward the door, then back at him. Someone who listens before he acts. Caleb let that sit for a moment. That makes him more dangerous, he said. She did not disagree. Her hand loosened slightly around the turquoise, and for the first time, she let it hang free at her side. The small piece caught the lantern light again, but now it looked different. Not fragile. Not lost. Placed. Chosen. They are closer than you think, she said quietly. Caleb stepped toward the window, glancing out into the dark stretch of land beyond his fence. Nothing moved. Not yet. But the air had changed again. He could feel it in his chest, in the way the night held its breath. How many? He asked. She did not answer immediately. When she did, her voice carried something new. Not fear. Not warning. Certainty. Enough, she said. Caleb nodded slowly, eyes still on the horizon. Then he reached for the lantern and turned the flame down just a little, letting the room fall deeper into shadow. Not hiding. Just preparing. Because out here, the quiet moments were never empty. They were waiting. The night did not grow darker all at once. It settled, slow and deliberate, like a blanket pulled over something that did not want to be seen. Caleb stood by the window, his silhouette barely outlined by the dim lantern behind him, eyes fixed on the open stretch of land beyond the fence. Nothing moved. No riders. No dust. But the stillness had weight now, pressing in from all sides, the kind that came before something chose to reveal itself. Behind him, she took a step closer, her movement quiet, controlled, no longer the unsteady presence he had carried in from the road. He noticed without turning. You walk different, he said, voice low. Only when I need to, she replied. There was no hesitation in her tone now. No weakness. Caleb let out a slow breath, something between acceptance and realization. So which one was real, he asked. A small pause. Then, both. He nodded once. That made sense out here. Truth had a way of wearing more than one face. Outside, the wind shifted again, this time carrying something faint but unmistakable. Not hoofbeats. Not yet. A presence. Like the land itself had begun to watch. Caleb reached for the rifle resting near the wall, not raising it, just holding it in his hand, feeling its familiar weight. Not for show. Never for show. You said they are close, he said. How close? She moved beside him now, her gaze following his out into the dark. Close enough to see your fire, she answered. Caleb glanced at the lantern, then lowered the flame further until the room fell into near shadow, shapes barely holding form. He did not extinguish it. Just enough to keep the night from swallowing them whole. You do not want them to find you, he said. But you are not hiding. It was not a question. She did not look at him when she answered. Hiding is for those who believe they can disappear, she said. I only needed time. Caleb studied her profile, the way her posture held steady, grounded, nothing like the woman he had found in the dust. Time for what? He asked. This time, she turned her head, meeting his eyes directly. For you to decide, she said. The words landed heavier than they sounded. Caleb did not respond right away. Outside, the silence stretched, then shifted again. A faint sound. Leather. Movement. Not loud. Careful. More than one. He stepped away from the window, moving toward the door without rushing, each step measured, controlled. His hand rested against the wood again, feeling for that subtle vibration. It was there now. More than before. Not one rider. Several. Still distant. Still choosing their moment. You brought this with you, he said, not accusing, just stating what the night had already confirmed. No, she replied quietly. It was already coming. Caleb let that settle. That changed things. Or maybe it did not. Out here, trouble did not need an invitation. It only needed a direction. He looked down at the small turquoise piece still hanging at her side, catching what little light remained. That thing, he said. It matters to them. She followed his gaze, then lifted it slightly, just enough for him to see it clearly. It matters to everyone who understands what it means, she said. Caleb's brow tightened just a fraction. And what is that? She held his eyes for a long second, and for the first time since he had met her, there was something. Almost like calm in her expression. Not relief. Not safety. Certainty. It means someone chose to stand where they did not have to, she said. The word stayed between them, quiet but unshakable. Outside, the sound came again, clearer now. Hoofbeats. More than one. Not rushing. Not hiding. Approaching with purpose. Caleb turned back to the door, grip steady on the rifle, posture relaxed but ready. Not a man preparing for a fight. A man preparing to stand. Behind him, she did not step back. Did not retreat. She stood where she was, shoulders squared, eyes forward, as if the night beyond that door belonged to her just as much as it did to him. The first shape appeared beyond the fence line, barely visible in the dark, then another, then more, forming slowly out of shadow like they had always been there, waiting to be seen. Caleb watched them come, silent, measured, and understood something then that most men out here never did. This was not about taking. Not about chasing. This was about something far older. And whatever choice he had been given, it had just run out of time. The riders did not rush the fence. They stopped just beyond it, where the land dipped slightly, letting their shapes settle into the dark like they belonged there. One became 5. 5 became more. Not loud. Not threatening. Just present. Caleb opened the door before they could call out, stepping onto the worn wood of his porch with the rifle resting low at his side, not raised, not hidden. The night air carried the scent of leather and dust, and something older beneath it, something that did not come from towns or roads. He counted without looking like he was counting. 10. Then more shapes behind them. No one spoke. Not at first. The silence stretched long enough to feel like a test. Caleb did not break it. He stood there, shoulders loose, eyes steady, waiting the way a man waits when he knows the next move is not his. One of the riders shifted forward, not crossing the fence, just enough for the lantern light spilling from the doorway to touch his face. He was older, lines carved deep from years that had not been easy, his posture straight without effort. No weapon in his hands. No need for one. "You took someone from the road," the man said, his voice calm, carrying across the distance without strain. Caleb did not move. "I gave her a place to rest," he answered. The man considered that, his gaze drifting once toward the cabin behind Caleb, then back again. "That place is not yours to give," he said. The words were not sharp. They did not need to be. Caleb shifted his weight slightly, enough to plant his boots firmer into the wood beneath him. "Out here," he said, "a man gives what he can." A faint murmur passed through the riders behind the older man, not anger, not agreement, just acknowledgement. The older man lifted his hand slightly, and the sound disappeared as quickly as it had come. He studied Caleb for a moment longer, then asked, "Does she speak?" Caleb's jaw tightened just a fraction. "When she wants to." That earned the smallest change in the man's expression, something close to recognition. Not of Caleb. Of her. Behind him, the cabin remained quiet. Too quiet. Caleb felt it before he heard anything, that shift again, like the moment before a storm breaks but never does. "She asked you to hide her," the man said. Caleb did not answer. The truth did not need repeating. The man nodded once, as if that silence confirmed more than words could. "And you agreed," he added. "I did not ask who she was," Caleb said. "Did not seem like my place." Another pause. The riders remained still, their horses calm, unmoving, like they had done this before. Many times. The older man took one step closer to the fence, stopping just short of crossing it. "And now?" he asked. Caleb's eyes flicked briefly toward the door behind him, then back to the man. "Now she is under my roof," he said. "That still means something where I come from." The words hung in the air, steady and unyielding. The older man did not respond right away. Instead, he looked past Caleb again, this time longer, as if listening for something only he could hear. Then, from inside the cabin, a sound. Soft. Measured. Footsteps. Not hurried. Not afraid. Caleb did not turn. He did not need to. He felt her presence before she reached the doorway, the air behind him shifting as she stepped into the faint light, no longer hidden by shadow. She did not stand behind him. She moved. To his side. The riders reacted, not with noise, not with movement, but with something deeper. A stillness that changed shape. The older man's posture straightened just slightly, his gaze lowering a fraction, not in submission, but in recognition. The others followed, one by one, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. Caleb noticed. He did not understand it yet. Not fully. Beside him, she lifted the small turquoise piece into the light, the silver catching just enough glow to make it visible across the distance. No words. None needed. The night held its breath again, but this time it was not waiting for a decision. It was witnessing one. Caleb's grip on the rifle loosened, just a little, not from weakness, but from the quiet realization settling into his chest. This was never about a woman running. And he had not just opened his door to a stranger. He had stepped into something that had been moving long before he ever saw her in the dust. No one spoke for a long moment after she stepped into the light. the desert had gone still in a way Caleb had never felt before, like even the wind had chosen to stay back and watch what came next. The older man lowered his head just slightly, not enough for most to notice, but enough that it changed everything. The riders behind him followed in their own quiet ways, shoulders easing, hands settling, eyes no longer searching but knowing. Caleb stood there, the weight of it pressing in without explanation, his gaze shifting from the man to the woman beside him. She did not look at the riders. She did not acknowledge their presence the way someone reunited would. Instead, she looked forward, past them, past the fence, like her place had never been in question. "You took longer than expected," the older man said finally, his voice carrying something different now, not authority, but patience that had run its course. She answered without raising her voice. "I needed to see." Caleb felt that more than he understood it. The man's eyes flicked once toward him, then back to her. "And have you?" he asked. A pause, small but deliberate. "Yes," she said. The word settled like a stone in still water, quiet but final. Caleb shifted his stance slightly, not stepping away, not stepping forward, just holding where he was. "You mind telling me what exactly I stepped into?" he asked, his tone even, not demanding, not uncertain. She turned her head toward him then, and for the first time, there was no guarded edge left in her expression. "A question," she said. Caleb frowned slightly. "That is a strange thing to bring to a man's door." "Only if you believe the answer does not matter," she replied. He held her gaze, searching for something that would ground this moment in something familiar, something simple. There was none. Outside, the older man took another step closer to the fence, his presence steady but no longer pressing. "He does not know," the man said, his voice directed toward her, not Caleb. "He was not meant to," she answered. Caleb exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, but enough to mark the shift inside him. He had seen men lie. He had seen men hide. This was neither. This was something chosen. "Then you better start talking," he said, not raising his voice, just letting the words land where they needed to. She looked at the turquoise in her hand, turning it once between her fingers before lifting her eyes back to him. "You saw me in the dust," she said. "You saw someone left behind." Caleb nodded once. "That is what it looked like." "That is what it was meant to look like," she said. The words came steady, without hesitation, like something she had carried long enough to know every edge of it. Caleb's brow tightened, not in anger, but in understanding that came a step too late. "So you were not running," he said. "No," she replied. "I was waiting." The wind moved again then, soft, carrying the faint sound of leather shifting, horses breathing, men holding still in ways most people never learned. Caleb glanced past her, at the riders, then back again. "For them?" he asked. She shook her head once. "For someone who would not ask who I was before deciding what to do." Caleb let out a quiet breath, something close to a dry laugh but without humor. "That narrows it down," he said. She did not smile. "More than you think," she answered. The older man spoke again, his voice lower now, almost respectful. "The choice has been made," he said. Caleb looked at him, then back at her. "Choice," he repeated. She met his gaze, steady, unwavering. "Out here," she said, "a man shows who he is long before anyone knows his name." The word settled into him, heavier than anything that had been said so far. Caleb glanced down at the rifle in his hand, then slowly lowered it, not because the moment was safe, but because it no longer belonged in it. When he looked back up, the riders had not moved, but the distance between them felt different now. Not closing. Not threatening. Waiting. And for the first time since this began, Caleb Whitaker understood that whatever was about to happen next, it was not up to him alone. The night did not move forward, yet everything inside it shifted. Caleb stood on that porch, the wood beneath his boots worn smooth by years that had never felt like this one, and for the first time in a long while, he understood what it meant to be seen without saying a word. The riders beyond the fence did not close the distance, but they no longer felt far. The space between them had changed, not in miles, but in meaning. Beside him, she lowered the turquoise slowly, her hand steady, her posture no longer carrying even a trace of the woman he had lifted from the dust. There was nothing fragile left in her now. Nothing uncertain. Caleb glanced at her, then back at the older man. "You came a long way for someone who was not running," he said. The older man gave a faint nod, his expression calm, but his eyes sharp with something deeper than simple purpose. "We came because she chose to walk," he replied. Caleb let that settle, turning the words over in his mind. "And if she had not?" he asked. The man did not hesitate. "Then we would still be looking." A quiet answer. But it carried weight. Caleb shifted his stance, one hand resting against the doorframe, not for support, just grounding himself in something real. "You said this was a choice," he said, looking at her again. "Seems like it was already decided before I ever saw her." She shook her head once, slow, deliberate. "No," she said. "It was not decided until you stopped." Caleb frowned slightly. "Stopped?" She met his gaze, steady and clear. "Most men would have kept riding," she said. "They see something broken, they look away. Or they ask what it costs before they help." Caleb let out a breath through his nose, quiet, thoughtful. "And I did not," he said. "No," she replied. "You did not." The words hung there, simple, but heavier than anything else spoken that night. Behind them, the lantern inside the cabin flickered once, casting a brief glow that reached past the doorway and into the dark, touching the fence, the riders, the dust at their feet. For a moment, everything felt still enough to hold. Then the older man moved. Not forward. Not closer. Just enough to shift the line of the night. He removed something from his saddle, slow and deliberate, and held it out across the fence line. Not offering it. Not forcing it. Just placing it in the space between them. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly as he stepped down from the porch, boots meeting the ground with a soft crunch. He did not raise his rifle. Did not reach for it either. He walked to the fence, stopping a few feet short, close enough to see what the man held. It was a strip of leather, worn but well kept, marked with symbols that did not belong to any place Caleb had ever called home. He glanced back once at her. She gave the smallest nod. That was all. Caleb stepped closer and took it, the leather warm from the man's hand, heavier than it should have been for something so small. "What is it?" he asked. The older man's gaze did not leave his. "A mark," he said. "Not of ownership? Of memory." Caleb looked down at it again, turning it slightly, feeling the texture, the age, the meaning pressed into something simple. "Memory of what?" he asked. This time, the answer did not come from the man. It came from her. Of a man who did not need to understand, to do what was right. Caleb went still for just a second, the words settling into him in a way that felt unfamiliar and permanent at the same time. He looked up again, past the fence, at the riders, at the man, then back at her. "And now?" he asked. She held his gaze, unwavering. "Now they remember," she said. The wind moved again, soft, carrying the scent of the desert across the land, through the fence, onto the porch behind him. The riders did not move. Did not speak. But something had changed. Not in them. In him. Caleb Whitaker stood there, the leather strip in his hand, the night no longer pressing in the same way it had before. And for the first time since this began, he understood that whatever came next, it would not be taken from him. It would be carried. The leather felt different the longer Caleb held it, like it carried more than shape, more than weight, something quiet but unyielding that settled into his palm and refused to be ignored. He stood by the fence, the riders still watching, the night no longer pressing but listening, and for a moment, no one moved because nothing needed to be forced forward anymore. Caleb looked down at the markings again, then slowly lifted his gaze to the older man. "You said this is memory," he said. "Seems like a heavy thing to hand to a stranger." The older man's expression did not change, but his voice carried a quieter depth now. "It is only heavy if a man tries to carry it for himself," he replied. Caleb considered that, turning the leather once more between his fingers before glancing back toward the porch. She had not stepped away. She stood where she had been, still, composed, her eyes no longer searching him, but steady, like whatever question had been asked had already found its answer. Caleb took a slow breath and walked back toward the porch, each step measured, not hesitant, not rushed. The boards creaked softly under his boots as he stepped up, stopping a few feet from her. For a second, neither spoke. The distance between them felt smaller now, but not because he had moved closer. Because something else had settled into place. "You could have told me," he said finally. She shook her head once. "If I had, you would have chosen differently," she answered. Caleb's brow furrowed slightly. "You do not know that." Her gaze did not waver. "I do," she said. The certainty in her voice left no space for argument, not because it was forceful, but because it was true in a way that did not need defending. Caleb let out a quiet breath, not frustration, not acceptance, just the sound of a man understanding something a little too late to question it. He glanced past her toward the open land, where the riders remained, still and patient, like time did not move the same way for them. "So what happens now?" he asked. She stepped forward then, just one step, closing the space between them enough that the lantern light caught her face clearly for the first time without shadow or doubt. "Now you return to your life," she said. Caleb let out a faint, dry exhale. "Feels like that might not be the same life anymore." A small shift crossed her expression then, not quite a smile, but something close to it, something that acknowledged the truth in his words. "No," she said softly. "It will not be." The wind moved again, brushing past them, carrying the scent of open land and something older that lingered just beneath it. Caleb looked down at the leather in his hand, then back at her. "And you?" he asked. She turned her head slightly, her gaze moving past him toward the riders, toward the land that had been waiting long before he ever saw her in the dust. "I go back to where I was always meant to be," she said. Caleb nodded slowly, not because he understood all of it, but because he understood enough. He stepped aside then, not as a gesture of surrender, but of acknowledgement, giving her the space she had never truly lost. She moved past him without hesitation, her steps quiet but certain, crossing the porch, stepping down into the dirt, and walking toward the fence line where the riders waited. As she approached, the older man lowered his head again, deeper this time, and the others followed, not in unison, not by command, but because it was the only way to stand in that moment. Caleb watched from the porch, the leather still in his hand, the lantern behind him casting a faint glow that did not reach far enough to touch what was happening beyond the fence. She did not look back at first. She stepped through the opening, moving among them not as someone returning, but as someone who had never been lost. Then, just once, she paused. Turned her head. Her eyes found his. No words passed between them. None were needed. Then she turned forward again, and the riders began to move, slow at first, then steady, carrying her back into the night, until the shapes faded, the sound of hoofbeats softened, and the desert returned to stillness once more. Caleb remained where he was, alone again on his porch, the night stretching out in front of him, unchanged and completely different all at once. Morning did not arrive with color. It came slow, pale, stretching across the horizon like it was unsure whether to stay or turn back. Caleb Whitaker was already awake when the first light touched the edge of his land, sitting on the same porch where he had stood the night before, the leather strip resting across his palm like it had never left. The desert was quiet again. No riders. No tracks close enough to matter. Just wind, moving steady, carrying nothing but itself. He looked out over the fence line, the same view he had seen every day for years, but something in it had shifted, not in shape, not in distance, but in meaning. The land did not feel empty anymore. It felt watched. Not by eyes. By memory. Caleb leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees, turning the leather ones between his fingers. The markings were still unfamiliar, still unreadable, but they did not feel foreign anymore. They felt placed. Chosen. Like something that did not belong to him, but had decided to stay anyway. He let out a slow breath, the kind a man takes when he realizes a moment has passed but not ended. Behind him, the cabin stood as it always had, wood-worn, door slightly off its hinge, the lantern inside now dim and cold. Nothing had changed there. Not in the way most folks would see. But Caleb knew better. A place could stay the same and still hold something new. He pushed himself to his feet, boots steady on the boards, and stepped down into the dirt, walking toward the fence without hurry. The ground still held faint impressions where the riders had stood, not clear enough to follow, not deep enough to mark direction, but enough to remind him they had been there. Enough to make the night real in the daylight. He stopped at the fence, resting one hand against the wood, looking out toward the horizon where they had disappeared. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, quietly, more to the land than to himself, he spoke. "You never told me your name." The wind answered the way it always did. "By moving on." Caleb gave a small nod, like that was enough. He turned back toward the cabin, taking a few steps before stopping again, his gaze drifting down to the leather in his hand. He studied it one more time, then did something he had not expected to do. He tied it to the fence post. Not high. Not hidden. Just where it could be seen by anyone who passed, or no one at all. The leather hung there, still in the morning air, the markings catching just enough light to exist without explanation. Caleb stepped back, hands settling at his sides, and looked at it for a long second. Not claiming it. Not giving it away. Just leaving it where it belonged now. Between. He turned again and walked back toward the porch, slower this time, not because he was tired, but because there was no reason to rush anymore. As he reached the steps, he paused, glancing once more over his shoulder. The horizon stretched wide and empty, just as it had the day before. But Caleb Whitaker did not see it the same way. Out here, a man could ride his whole life thinking the land was his to cross. But sometimes, the land chose to remember him instead. And that was a different kind of belonging entirely. He stepped inside, the door closing behind him with a soft, familiar sound, leaving the leather swaying gently on the fence, and the desert holding a story it would never need to tell out loud.